Let me start by saying a thank you to the committee of the Royal Historical Society for shortlisting me for this prize. It's a real honour to be on the shortlist with some outstanding scholars. My book, The Purchase of the Past, published by Cambridge University Press, explores the culture of collecting in post-revolutionary Paris. It brings new sources and new actors to bear upon a classic question. What was the relationship between the French Revolution and the development of historical consciousness? It's long been recognised that the shocking and sudden collapse of the French monarchy shattered contemporary understandings of the relationship between past and future. Yet in exploring this rupture, historians have largely drawn on texts related to the history of ideas. In my book, I wanted to think instead about the lives of objects and what happened to the stuff of the old regime in the new post-revolutionary conditions. This is a story more about persistence than sharp breaks, exploring how the visual and material culture of previous centuries was conserved, commodified, and reinvented. The French Revolution was, of course, fundamental to the growth of European museums. Scholars have demonstrated that the transfer of property from aristocratic émigrés, religious houses, and corporations was central to new discourses of le patrimoine, or the national heritage. Yet this is only half the story. Huge quantities of artwork circulated on the open market too, sometimes misidentified, reviled as politically suspect, or sold off at derisory prices. Put this way, the French Revolution brought about not just the nationalisation, but also the simultaneous privatisation of France's cultural assets. The tension between these two processes, I argue, would echo for generations. Indeed, 1789 introduced a dialectic between destruction, recuperation, and recollection that recurred at many points throughout the 19th century. The main actors in the book are the private collectors who sought to profit from the extraordinary windfall of the 1790s. These men, and they were largely men, were at once appalled by the destructiveness of the French Revolution, while also rushing to profit from the dispersal of previous galleries and libraries. Paris became a vast hunting ground for these scavengers in the early 19th century, men who reinvented the category of the amateur, previously associated with the taste-making institutions of the old regime. These collectors were usually antiquarians and sometimes pioneering cultural historians too, seeing in their acquisitions ways of imaginatively connecting with the monarchical past and even fathoming the secrets of the revolution itself. Let me illustrate this with one example that I used for the cover of my book. This, just as it loads here, is Alexandre Charles Sauvageot. Now, Sauvageot was a violinist at the opera. He was a customs official, and he was a man who, in the wake of the French Revolution, acquired an amazing range of medieval and Renaissance artifacts, including ivories, ceramics, paintings, and indeed pieces of armor. His personal motto was Dispersa coegi, or I have gathered what was scattered. And his salvage crusade, as he imagined it, was presented as a direct response to the excesses of the French Revolution. Sauvageot is a fascinating example, I think, of the deep financial, emotional, and even erotic investment that individuals had in the distant past. He saw himself as a historian, eager to decipher each of his possessions, even if we might quarrel today with some of his attributions. He was also a celebrity, caricatured in fiction, whose home was a private museum, regularly opened up to visitors and foreign tourists. Most importantly, he decided to donate the majority of his medieval and Renaissance collections to the Louvre in 1856. But crucially, he insisted that he came with them. Hence, Sauvageot was named honorary curator at the Louvre, helped oversee the installation of his collection, conducted personal tours for friends, and even slept next to the objects in the museum. His story reminds us that collectors were not just auxiliaries or collaborators for civic institutions, but often sought to remake them in their own image, thereby complicating our definition of what counts as a public as opposed to a private patrimony. This friction is at the heart of the politics of collecting, which I think matters for all of us concerned with who owns and who speaks for the past. Through their networks of sociability, collectors set themselves up as gatekeepers to France's cultural inheritance. After 1870, this sometimes put them directly up against the Republican administration, who they accused of incompetence, of ignorance, or even of vandalism, drawing on the term associated with the First French Revolution. To that extent, I'm interested in the divisiveness of heritage, raising questions over who could legitimately care for the nation's treasures. While Paris was a capital of the global market in art and antiques, many deplored the export of French masterpieces abroad. Hence, the idealized image of the amateur was often contrasted with unsavory commercial dealers or Philistine English or American plutocrats who had the cash, it seemed, but no class. Meanwhile, anti-Semitic slurs blamed Jewish collectors and Jewish dealers for corrupting French taste and civilization. Put together then, the book hopes to show the value of collections and collecting as a lens for understanding not just post-revolutionary France, but also the very material out of which the historical imagination was formed in the 19th century and over which it is still fought today. Thank you for listening and for reading.